to the purpose of the church. We also include very practical supernatural training and coaching on ministering with Holy Spirit. Our information and registration evening will take place on Tuesday, the 26th of January at 7 p.m. Purpose of the church. You can sign up for the live, very practical and supernatural training and coaching on ministering with Holy Spirit. Our information and registration evening will take place on Tuesday, the 26th of January at 7 p.m. Purpose of the church. You can sign up for the live, very practical and supernatural training and coaching on ministering with Holy Spirit. Our information and registration evening will take place on Tuesday, the 26th of January at 7 p.m. You can sign up for the live, very practical and supernatural training and coaching on ministering with Holy Spirit. Our information and registration evening will take place on Tuesday, the 26th of January at 7 p.m. You can sign up for the live, very practical and supernatural training and coaching on ministering with Holy Spirit. Tune in live.
All right, we are back live on YouTube on Mr. Pierce's suppression motion. We took a break. During the break, my understanding is that Attorney Schindhelm procured the body cams that both he and Attorney Nelson were waiting for. Attorney Schindhelm relayed to me that there was nothing of note on those body cams, and of course he can expand what I have to say. I haven't seen them. But he also indicated that he is going to concede the issue, so to speak, given that he doesn't believe that there was anything of evidentiary value located in the vehicle at any rate. Attorney Schindhelm, did I capture that correctly?
Yes, Judge. Officer Chemnitz, K-E-M-N-I-T-Z, is the officer who transported the defendant from his arrest. He had told us this morning that he thought he had body cam that might show the signing of the consent form. We didn't have that in our possession, speaking for the state. Prior to this, he burned me a copy of, I think it's 4 or 5 body cams from himself and a transport of the vehicle. I skimmed them quickly with Detective Porter, who's my case officer. Couldn't find any evidence that the body cams actually captured the moment of the defendant signing the consent to search form. But as the court said, to my knowledge, there's nothing of evidentiary value discovered within the vehicle, so I'm not opposing that portion of the defendant's motion.
All right, very good. So then, Attorney Nelson, you've prevailed on that portion of your motion. Anything that may have been in the vehicle will be suppressed, okay?
Understood. Thank you.
Now, back to the situation regarding Mr. Pierce's statements. I heard the testimony from Officer Koschelik. Does the state have any additional witnesses in that regard?
No.
All right, Attorney Nelson, are you calling any witnesses?
Yes, defense would call Toby Pierce.
All right, to the deputies, is it acceptable to you if Mr. Pierce stays where he is as long as we can hear him? All right, Attorney Schindhelm, any objection to that?
No, I may move around so I can see him if that's all right.
Yep, that's perfectly perfect. All right, so Mr. Pierce, it's very important that we can all hear you. We had some issues before, but I think that we have that sound issue resolved. It's important that I can hear you, so make sure you speak loud and clear. If I can't, I'm going to tell you to speak up, just like I did with Officer Koschelik, all right?
Yes, ma'am.
All righty.
Best as you can, sir. Can you please raise your right hand? Thank you. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you give in this matter shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God under the pain and penalty of perjury?
Yes.
Thank you. Please speak directly into the microphone now. State and spell your first and last name for the record, please.
Toby Pierce Jr.
Spell it.
TOBYPIERCEJR.
All right, very good. Attorney Nelson, go ahead.
Thank you, Judge. Mr. Pierce, we're going to start by talking about August 9th, 2020. Do you remember that night?
Yes.
Where were you on that night?
At home in bed.
What's the address at home?
2977 North 26th Street, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53206.
At some point that night, did you have an interaction with a couple of law enforcement officers?
Yes.
When those officers arrived, were you awake or asleep?
Asleep.
At some point, did you wake up?
Yes.
What caused you to wake up?
My girlfriend woke me up.
Can you still hear? Okay. And what was it that woke her up?
Flashing lights at the window.
And when you say flashing lights, are you talking like red and blue police lights or something else?
No, all white flashlights.
And did you ever figure out what those lights were?
Yes.
What were they?
The police was knocking at the door and one was flashing lights in the window.
Okay, slow it down.
All right, could you repeat what you just said there, Mr. Pierce?
One officer was knocking at the door and one officer was flashing the lights in the window, flashlight.
And what did you do at this point?
Immediately cut on the inside light of the living room and I went downstairs and opened the door.
Now, at this point, what were you wearing?
Shorts and a t-shirt.
And so you said you went downstairs to the door. Did you open the door?
Yes.
What did you see when you opened the door?
Two officers standing there
And how did you know that they were officers?
by their badges on their neck.
But they weren't wearing uniforms at that time?
No, sir.
Did they have guns?
Yes,
Were they out or in their holster?
in their holster.
Did they say anything to you when you opened the door?
They asked me, was I Toby? And I said, yes.
I'm sorry, they said what?
Was my name Toby? And I said, yes.
Okay.
Then what happened?
And then they said, you know why we're here?
Okay, did you respond to that?
I said, yes.
Okay. Did anything else happen at the downstairs part of your house?
They said, we need to talk to you. Can we go upstairs?
Okay, and what did you say to that?
I said, yes.
And then what happened?
We proceeded upstairs. And when we got to the front where we were sleeping at, I asked the officer, how did they get my name and my address?
Okay, so let's break this down a little bit. You're upstairs in your apartment, correct?
Yes.
And there's two officers and you.
And my girlfriend, Kimberly.
So there's four people.
Kimberly. Kimberly.
Is there anybody other than the four of you in your apartment at that point?
No.
What happened when you got upstairs?
I asked the officer, how did they get my name and address?
And did they tell you?
Yes.
What did they say?
They said there was cameras that captured my video and my license plates on video.
Okay, and then what happened?
They asked me what happened.
Prior to them asking you what happened, did they advise you that you have a right not to speak with them
No,
or a right to speak with an attorney
no,
or tell you that anything you say will be used against you in court?
no,
Did you tell them what happened?
yes,
Did they ask you if you had anything to drink the night before?
no,
And the night before being August 8th, 2020?
no,
Did they ask any other questions after asking you to tell what happened?
yes.
What did they ask you?
They asked me, what have I been doing since that day?
Since August 8th?
Yes,
At some point, did they tell you that they were going to, that you would need to go with them?
yes.
And what did you do at that point?
I proceeded to put on my shoes. They let me put on my shoes and a pair of pants and a shirt.
Okay, and at that point, they didn't ask you any further questions?
No,
While they were asking you these questions, were you handcuffed at all?
no,
Did you feel like you were free to leave?
pardon me?
Did you feel like you were free to leave?
No,
Did you ever tell the officers to leave your apartment?
No,
Why didn't you tell them to leave?
because they would study asking me what I was doing up until the time they came there.
Okay, I don't have any other questions.
6 a.m.
Thank you, Judge. Mr. Pierce, this is my chance to ask a couple of questions. If I say something that's not clear, or if you don't understand what I mean, just let me know. I'll try to ask it a different way, okay?
Yes,
We're talking about the night the police came to your house, August 9th of last year, right?
right,
And you said there was a brief conversation at your door, true?
yes,
And according to you, the officers asked you, can we go upstairs?
yes,
And you told them yes.
yes,
So it's fair to say you invited them in?
yes,
And when you got upstairs, it was not only you and the two officers, but also your girlfriend in the room, true?
yes.
Is it fair to say all four of you were talking?
No,
Explain what happened. Who was talking?
just me and the officers. My girl never said a word,
She didn't say a word,
not one word.
but they didn't exclude her or tell you that she couldn't be there when you're being spoken with, true?
No, no,
And you told us that the first thing that anyone asked upstairs was you asking them a question about how they got your name and address.
yes,
And you told us that the first thing that they asked you was just what happened.
yes,
And fair to say you responded by telling them that you had been in an accident?
no.
How did you respond?
The first question they asked me, what was I doing up until the time they came there?
I'm sorry, I thought you had testified earlier that the first thing they asked you was what happened? Is that,
No, I asked them, the first thing I asked them was, how did they get my name and address?
right? And I might have this wrong, but I thought you had told us that the next thing that happened was them asking you just generally what happened?
No, they asked me what was I doing up until the time. Then they asked me what happened.
Okay. And when they asked you what happened, what did you tell them?
I told them that I was in an accident.
Fair to say you told them that you had struck a pedestrian who just kind of jumped out at you?
No, I didn't.
Fair to say that you told them that you had struck someone?
No, I didn't.
Fair to say that you told them that this accident happened in the area of 27th and Kilbourne?
Yes,
But today you're denying that you told them that a pedestrian came out of nowhere?
no, I didn't tell, not at my house, I didn't.
You didn't tell them that at your house?
No,
Fair to say that you told the officers that you had been with your friend Tremel Jackson
yes,
and that you had probably had a little too much to drink?
never mentioned anything about drinking.
I'm sorry, can't hear you.
No,
You didn't say that?
no,
And did you tell them that you left the scene of the accident and came home?
I told them I kept going and drove straight home. Yes,
We can't understand you.
yes,
That you kept going and you came straight home? Is that what you just said?
yes,
And did you make statements to them about originally planning to have your car fixed,
no,
but deciding not to because you saw something about the accident on the news?
no,
You didn't tell them that?
no.
At some point before the officers talked to you, did you know the identity of the person who had been killed in that car accident?
No,
No?
no,
Do you recall later telling the officers in one of those Mirandized at the district or at the police department interviews that I think it's your girlfriend Jackson told you the next day that it was your friend Red that you had hit?
it's not that was the guy that was with me, Tremel. Jackson is the guy that was with me. He knew the guy, and he told me that day.
So prior to the officers ever talking to you, Tremel Jackson told you that your friend or someone you knew, Red, was the person who had been hit?
Yes,
The officers, when they're talking to you in your apartment, was their tone conversational?
pardon me?
Let me ask that a different way. Were they talking to you in a pleasant manner?
Conversation-wise, yes.
Basically the way we're talking now?
Yes.
Fair? They didn't raise their voices at you?
No,
They didn't badger you?
no,
They didn't threaten you?
no,
Never drew their weapons?
no.
And the whole length of that time, do you remember how long those officers were inside your apartment speaking with you?
Probably maybe 20 minutes.
You think it was up to 20 minutes?
Yes.
And that ended with the officers telling you that they were placing you under arrest, correct?
They said I would have to come with them.
Nothing further.
All right. Any more questions for him?
Nothing on that, no.
Nothing at all?
No.
All right, very good. Any other witnesses?
No, the defense would rest.
All right, for rebuttal from the state? All right, Attorney Shinhelm, your argument?
Judge, just focusing on that first statement at the defendant's apartment, I think you've had pretty clear testimony, which lays out convincingly that this is not a statement made in custodial interrogation. The defendant's in his own home. According to the officers, the conversation only takes about 5 minutes. The defendant believes it was approximately 20 minutes, but either way is a fairly brief conversation. Everyone agrees it's conversational. There's no threats. There's no accusations. It's simply the two officers trying to figure out who was driving the defendant's car when it struck and killed the victim. The defendant has testified that he didn't feel free to leave, but he's also testified that he invited the officers into his home and that the conversation happened in front of his girlfriend. He wasn't sequestered or separated from people. I think that environment is one of the leading factors the court needs to look at when making the determination if the defendant's in custody. And here he's really kind of the master of the domain where the conversation's taking place. He's in the comfort of his own home, in the living room, sitting on a chair next to his girlfriend. And when you look at the factors under State v. Morgan, 2002 WI AP 124, almost every one of those factors, I think virtually all of them, cut to suggest that this defendant was not in custody. I've talked about most of them, his movement not being restricted, there only being two officers present and really only one officer asking questions, the questioning being brief, the questioning just being investigatory rather than accusatory in nature. So I think when you apply the test that's found in Morgan, because the defendant was not in custody when he made those admissions to officers, you should deny the defense motion. Briefly on the later statements.
I don't think there was any challenge to the later statements.
Then I won't argue the point, Judge. I'll simply ask you to deny the defense motion.
Attorney Nelson.
Thank you, Judge. As far as the custodial nature, I believe that is the key issue here. And I would refer back to the Martin citation with my motion to suppress that I filed, that State v. Martin 343, Wisconsin 2nd, 278 at 298. And that's a Wisconsin Supreme Court 2012 case. It said that a person's in custody for the purposes of Miranda, where a reasonable person would not feel free to terminate the interview and leave the scene. Here we've got two officers in plain clothes that show up at Mr. Pierce's house in the middle of the night. They awaken him by knocking on his door and flashing flashlights through the window. When he comes downstairs, the officers, when they confront Mr. Pierce at his door, they ask if they can come into his house. While it's true that Mr. Pierce did acknowledge and allow them inside the house, I don't believe that that was a voluntary act at that point. It was just an assent to apparent authority. So they're allowed into his house. He's dressed in what he was sleeping in, which is a pair of shorts and a t-shirt. A reasonable person would not feel free to terminate that encounter at that point. If he's already, which Mr. Pierce has already testified, that he did not feel free to leave, he wouldn't even really have been able to leave. It's his house. The only way that he could terminate that would be to tell the officers to leave. Admittedly, he didn't do that. And as far as, I don't think the state really got into this much with their argument, but they touched on it briefly by characterizing this as just a conversation. And while yes, the tone may be conversational and it may have been absent threats or coercion, but a Mirandized interview at a police station doesn't need threats or coercion to change it from an interview into an interrogation. The interrogation is asking questions that are designed to elicit an incriminating response. And that's exactly what we had here. We had officers asking Mr. Pierce what happened to his car. They know exactly what happened to this car. They want Mr. Pierce to say what happened to his car. So for those purposes, I believe it was a custodial interrogation, and we would ask the court to grant the motion to suppress the statement. And as far as the subsequent statements, we did mention that in the beginning of this hearing, that the statements 3 and 4, not the hospital statement, but statements 3 and 4, which were testified to by the officer, by the state's witness today, those cannot be cured by a subsequent Mirandized interview. And so if it is a violation of Mr. Pierce's Miranda rights for that first interview, statements 3 and 4 must also be suppressed as fruit of the poisonous tree. Thank you.
All right, so here's the situation. The police are investigating a hit and run in which a pedestrian is killed and found dead at the scene. And the investigation of law enforcement takes them to the home of Mr. Pierce. And at this point, law enforcement has an idea of what vehicle it is, apparently from cameras, and are obviously able to determine who a vehicle is registered to. And this takes them, again, to Mr. Pierce's home. So police arrive at Mr. Pierce's home. Apparently, somebody's knocking at the door. Flashlights may be going into the upstairs area where Mr. Pierce lives, and Mr. Pierce, adorned in his sleep garb, goes and enters the door. And according to Officer Koschelik, police get there, defendant answers the door, they greet each other, ask if he knows why they're there, identify themselves as members of law enforcement, and according to Officer Koschelik, defendant invited them inside. On cross-examination, Mr. Pierce indicated that he in fact did invite the police officers into his home. He leads them upstairs, closes his door, his girlfriend is present. He and his girlfriend were not separated. His girlfriend apparently did not participate in the conversation with the police officers, and a short period of questioning takes place. The defendant apparently is asked a number of questions to which he gives answers that he is now denying that he gave, but according to Officer Koschelik, he gave answers. He implicated himself, said he had a little bit too much to drink, saw news reports of this incident on television, and after a short period of questioning, he is then arrested. And the question becomes, was he in fact in custody at the time that he made the admissions that the state seeks to use likely in their case in chief? And if he was in custody and improperly questioned, should the later statements also be suppressed? Well, the bottom line is the questioning done by police officers was very brief in nature. I cannot find that this was in any way a custodial search. It took place in the defendant's home. It was very brief. His girlfriend was with him. He was not handcuffed. He very conveniently said he didn't feel as though he was free to leave, but I don't know where he'd want to go anyway. It's the middle of the night, he's asleep in his house. And police interview him. It's very brief investigatory questions. If, he hadn't answered the door, would they have had reason to arrest him? Probably not. If he hadn't answered their questions, would they have had reason to arrest him at that point? Maybe not. I don't know what else their investigation had uncovered. But Mr. Pierce, the bottom line is you had short conversational inquiries, or they had inquiries of you. You apparently asked them questions that they answered. It sounds like you're doing just fine. Doesn't sound that you were coerced in any way. It doesn't sound like you were scared. Sounds like you actually knew it was just a matter of time before they be coming to your door. So do I find that you were in custody and that this was a custodial interrogation where Miranda warnings would be required? I absolutely don't, Mr. Pierce. I don't even think it's a close call. Lawyer did a good job bringing this motion for us to sift through whether or not your statements would be suppressed, but the motion to suppress is denied. All right, so it's denied in part as to the statements, it's granted in part in regard to the motor vehicle. And what's next? How do we want this calendared?
I would prefer if we could get a status in a couple weeks, maybe the first week of February, so that I could talk next steps with Mr. Pierce.
All right, sounds good. Get you a couple weeks, you can talk to him. Yep.
Okay.
I don't know if it's available, but Thursday, the 28th, I'm wide open in the afternoon.
It is not available. How about February 3rd at 11 o'clock by Zoom?
Good for the state.
That works.
Okay, next court date, February 3rd at 11 o'clock for status